Hi, this is Paul, and this is a Randos I've been looking forward to for a while now. I met Raymond at ARC, and he, um, his personality is bigger than life, and I really enjoyed him. And so then I said, "Boy, I want to talk to you. I want to do a Randos conversation with you." And he agreed, which I'm really happy for. And again, to me, the whole arc thing is all about the people that you meet because um,
Definitely. I
that's
got that sense as well.
so okay. Well, a lot of people don't know you, but you actually are. Oh, in some ways responsible or at least participating in a fair amount of the life that a lot of people watching this enjoy, and they don't know anything about it. So that's part of why this is so
Well,
good.
well, part I have, by the grace of God and weird happenings, happen to be helping Jonathan Pajot basically with all of his technology back end stuff. I had been a fan for many years, and I was on that subscription tier where you get to talk to him once a year.
Uh-huh.
And we talked. This was many years ago, I think 4 years now, and hit it off and kept the conversation going. And then he had a bunch of really terrible things happen with his website and subscription stuff. And I was like, well, God, I also run a tech startup. That's what I do now. And I was like, I guess he's put us together for this reason. So we kind of just, I got my team together, like, let's build him a new website. Let's fix his subscription stuff. And since then, just kind of been there and a very small part of the team. Of course, most of it is Jonathan and the amazing stuff that he's doing that we all love. But I feel very, very fortunate to be involved in a very small way, and I mean that sincerely.
I can very much understand why when he met you, you guys hit it off because I don't know how. I'm sure there are people that don't hit it off with you, but I find that hard to
Oh
believe.
yes.
I find that really hard to believe, but
Well, the
that's
longer you talk to me, you'll realize.
oh really? So by the end of the 2 hours, I'll hate your guts. That's what you're saying.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, well, we'll see. It's really hard for people to get me to hate their guts. It's actually far harder than people imagine. Many try, and then I tend to tease and troll back, and then they think he really hates my guts. It's like I don't hate your guts at all. The people I don't like, I actually just completely ignore. If I'm teasing you, it means I
Yes.
like you, and a
Oh, I
certain.
like it. Tease away.
All
Happy
right.
to.
Well, let's get into. Well, I'm just gonna obviously the kind of questions you've seen the drill. The kind of questions I ask are invasive and intrusive, and this is being recorded, so feel free to duck and weave and avoid anything you don't want to talk about. But that's on you. So I'm
Okay.
not gonna dig and pry, but I'm gonna give broad open questions for you to fill in where you want to. And sort of the nature of these conversations is exploratory and I got doing this basically out of much more my pastoral side, where
Yeah.
when I talk to people, I just try to have them open up a little bit because I've so often, the reason the rest of my channel is like it is because I notice that when I talk, I learn about myself. So tell me about the home you grew up in.
Oh, yeah, it's wild. And I just want to say before we go on that I've also been a fan of your channel for a long time. I am a forever lurker. I don't comment, I don't do anything. I just don't have the time most of the time. But I really love and appreciate what you're doing, and I especially feel an affinity to kind of your perspective because I come and we'll get to it how I got there, but from a reformed, Calvinist theological background, and have now converted to Orthodoxy. But I really felt like, especially as I was on my journey, listening to you and everything that you were doing, really put things in perspective and made me oftentimes they're like, what am I doing? Like, what are we doing? What is happening right now? How reactionary am I being? So anyway, I just wanted to say that before we went on, that I really appreciate that. And I hope that in the conversation we can talk about that too as well.
Okay.
So
There's usually time
yeah,
for lots of things.
yeah. But home I grew up in. So I was actually born in Germany. My mother was a woman that was born in Romania in a basically Amish Lutheran town in Romania. Basically, those Templars that came and fought in the Crusades took up residence, in the 1200s in Romania, and they're actually the Siebenbürgen, the seven-citied German peoples of Romania. So they spoke a very old dialect of German.
Hmm.
And she grew up basically during the rise of communism. My grandpa fought for the Nazis, and that big
Yeah.
push in World War II, as you've talked many times on your channel about that time. And she actually escaped that area by marrying a government official, and she went to Germany and then Italy to study opera. And so she was an amazing, prodigious voice, and she sang quite extensively in the German-speaking and Italian-speaking areas of Europe. And so, on the flip side, my father was born in Queens, New York. He was also a prodigious actor and singer. He was actually part of that original group of Robert Duvall, John Voight, like those were all of his friends when he was young. But and so he did stuff on Broadway, View from the Bridge, things like that. Was really involved. But his real love was opera, and so he moved to Germany to pursue an opera career. I don't know if you know anything about opera. I don't know why you would. Basically, nobody cares about opera, which is completely understandable. But back in the 60s, 70s, 80s timeframe, if you were an American and wanted an opera career, the absolute best way to do it was to travel to Europe, especially German-speaking countries, just because there were so many opportunities for work. And that's where he met my mother. Now, it sounds like out of a storybook. My mother comes from basically horse-drawn carriage society, escapes the Iron Curtain, moves to the greater Western Europe, divorces her husband, meets the love of her life, singing opera together in Germany. But, my father was quite the man, very charismatic man, very smart man, but also someone that was deeply, deeply steeped in the New Age religion that was going on, as you probably remember, in the 70s and 80s. It really started taking off. And so he was part of that movement. And my mother, who was just such a light-bearing person in her demeanor, but also very open, really took to that too. My grandmother, by the way, her mother is the most to this day. She's 96 years old, a devout Lutheran, now living in Germany. And so, it was quite the thing for my mother to kind of abandon,
Mhm.
her Lutheran heritage. And these people felt like they kind of carried the candle of Protestantism, into Romania. You used to be Hungary and before that and all of that. So it was a big thing for her to kind of abandon that. But they got together, and my father ended up following this very famous New Age leader in the 70s and 80s. You may have heard of her. Her name was J.Z. Knight. She was a woman that lived in Washington State and claimed to channel a 35,000-year-old warrior spirit named Ramtha,
I've
who
heard of that. Yeah.
yeah, who used to be the king of Lemuria and fought a war against the Greys and the lizard people on, Lemuria, or the island of Atlantis, which actually
Lizard
caused the
people must
sinking.
be resisted. Let's just be clear on that.
I know. I mean, we
We're
can
not a pro
completely agree,
lizard
and
people
they are among
channel.
us. They
Yeah,
are
they
among
are.
us.
Just I hear that often. So we are not pro lizard people. I just want to be, we
Okay,
got to
all
be
right,
very
yeah.
careful
If they're
about our
watching,
political
yeah.
alignments. Not pro lizard people here, but please go on.
Yeah. So, they got really devoted into that. Now, the other thing about my father was that he was a bigger than life person, but also very controlling, a tyrant and abusive. And that basically started when my mother and him met. I mean, my mother was also not an easy person. She was very, very strong-willed, very, very, emotional. I mean, artists. What can you say?
Artists, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, they're artists. Like,
Pastors know artists because
yes,
in the big box evangelical megachurch movement, pastors need artists, and then they're like pastors and artists are just doing this all the time. But
exactly.
oh, you just
Sorry,
muted.
I just gotta. Yeah, something happened with my. Just making sure it's working. Give me a second.
Okay.
Okay, good. Yeah. So anyway, it was right, and I was born in that passion. And I mean, just to give you an idea of Ramtha, it was that very. I don't know if you ever heard of this book or the many that came as like Pyramid Power. It was a
Yeah,
really big book
yeah, yeah,
in the
yeah,
70s and
yeah.
80s that aliens and getting into getting the divine and all of that. So it was quite a thing because they slept with like a pyramid, over their bed so that they could channel the pyramid power into their
Wow.
into their spirit and stuff like that. But anyway, when I was born at about 1 year old, my mother and father decided that they wanted, and I think it was a multitude of reasons. One being my dad probably burned every bridge that he had in Europe. He was also friends with people like Domingo, I'm sure you've heard of, Sam Raimi and stuff like that. And I mean, had a not a star career, but he was working,
Yeah,
and so was
yeah.
my mother. But as those bridges were burned, they decided to move from Germany to Washington State to be close to Jay-Z Knight because Jay-Z Knight had bought a bunch of land in Yelm, Washington, which is basically middle of the nowhere, Washington, which was called the Ranch. And she would have basically these large meetings, these large sessions that you would pay $5,000 for a weekend to go to, where they would meditate and do a host of other things. And just to give you an idea of who this woman was, because I mean, this is what I went to when I was young, right? You'd have 5,000, 6,000 people all together. You know, a woman would come in dressed in a robe, kind of like old school robe, come in up on the top, sit on the stage, and then she would go down, and it would be she'd come back up, and now she's Ramtha. So the spirit would come into her, and now she was Rantha, and then she would ramble on for 8, 9, 10 hours sometimes about how to become enlightened, right? So, I mean, think theosophy, that whole stuff like bundled up. I mean, the woman is very smart. I have to I
Yeah,
mean, she
yeah,
probably had a photographic memory,
yeah, yeah,
and was able to blend all of the stuff together,
yeah,
all the
yeah,
new age
yeah,
Christianity, Islam,
yeah.
mysticism, uh, uh, the aliens were he was the product of alien experiments from the Andromeda galaxy, all of that stuff. That's basically what the milieu of this belief system was.
Yeah.
And my parents moved to do that, and then we actually bought a farm. And one aspect of the Ramtha thing was that the world was going to end, as one does in a cult. The world is always
It,
going to end.
it tends to put up the pressure and make people show up in special ways.
That's right.
If
That's
it's just
right.
about to be over, time, Fisher Cup bait here, folks.
Exactly. But and I mean, she got it wrong a couple times, but
As
yeah,
everyone so far has
yeah,
done.
yeah, she got it wrong. The one that I remember and was kind of like freaked me out as a kid was that there was a moment. I think it was two. I was 92 or 2002 that all the planets were going to line up behind the sun. And when that happened, it was going to create this magnetic storm that was going to flood half the world. And the half that didn't flood, they had to live underneath the bunkers because the sky wasn't going to work. So, just to give you an idea, we were a completely self sustaining farm. We had 100 chickens, horses, cows, many different kinds of crops. We built a cellar under the ground that we could possibly live in. That was kind of that was what I grew up in. Um, was
Wow.
that kind of now on top of that? My father, of course, was not going to give up his artistic inclinations.
No.
And so what he did was start a voice and acting studio,
Oh,
which comprised mostly of students from the Ramtha cult,
sure.
right? So he would meet people there. Oh my gosh, you have such a beautiful voice. I worked with John Voight. I know Domingo personally. I can unlock you, right? Like I can get you where you need to go. And so he would get. And as you know, as a pastor, having dealt with the kinds of people that are going to these cults are forever searching. They come from very broken places. They have horrible, horrible backstories. Or on the other side, they're very agreeable. They had the nicest parents that you could ever hope for and just are easily, easily eaten by the big
There's
bug.
no con like the religious con. There
There's no
really
con.
isn't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, I grew up around that kind of place. My father would have, 20, 30 people there Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, when there would be acting classes, and then people would be doing singing classes. And during this time, you know, my mother was there. And, what I want to say about her is, when we talk about someone that sacrifices for her children, I really think that she did. I think that especially what she gave up, she was an amazing singer. And I think she actually could have gone
Mm,
all the way, but she
mm,
wanted kids more.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
so she had me and my younger brother, Arnold, and kind of gave it up. And really, as we were there, kind of was that rock of love and nurturing. And she really, as things progressed, as we'll get into, she really was the shield to my brother and I,
Mm,
as things got way, way worse, which they did.
yeah.
Because as one does when they're part of a cult or, interested in that, my father also started getting ideas. And so
Yes.
he formed his own cult,
That's the way it always
where he
goes
was a
like that.
spiritual master. But it's funny. The only way that you can really learn the deep spiritual practices is by having sex with him. I don't
And
know if you know
that
that.
always comes as such a
It's
surprise.
such a surprise, you know?
Here's the older man, and he's so wise and he's so powerful. And here, this young, happens to be quite attractive woman is the one with so much potential. And the only
Exactly.
way to unlock this is for the keymaster to find the gatekeeper. And,
Exactly.
and Ghostbusters just happens.
Exactly. And my father had no qualms. It was men, women, whatever. I mean, the big thing, there was the thing like there was a couple tenets that he really drilled into me and all of his students was that you cannot be shut down. If you're shut down, you're not actually participating in being what you could really be. You are a god. You are a god, and I can help you
That's right.
become a god.
And we especially like our female gods with their legs wide open. That's the way
Exactly,
to be a
exactly,
female god.
exactly, exactly. Which is really interesting because,
Surprise!
yeah, it's a surprise, which is really interesting because, you know, having become Orthodox now and the idea of theosis, there is the inverse of that idea.
Yeah,
Almost the same language, but the inverse.
yeah, yeah.
And so I really have it was very interesting, especially as I went through my faith journey to kind of always have that in the back of my mind because I saw my dad for who he really was.
Yeah,
And who he really was a man that beat my mother
yeah,
day after day
yeah,
and ended up beating me.
yeah.
And my older brother, who he had with another woman before this, I left that out. But um, he was an evil man and he treated his students terribly.
Yeah.
And as what happens when you join these kinds of cultic systems, these people, their identity becomes him,
Yeah.
right? And so he's there in the 1980s charging $300 an hour to have a voice lesson. And so he's having, and some of these people, which is really shocking to think about, they're doctors, real estate agents, people with money and means, and they were just siphoning it all to him,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and would do anything for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, some of my, just to give you an idea of the place, I mean, you asked, tell me if it's too much, but like you asked, an acting class would be 30 people in a room sitting. Someone goes up to do a monologue. The person would do the monologue. They miss a line. They forget a line. My dad stops everybody. He's sitting in his chair. He goes up and he goes, "You missed your line. What what's going on with you? Why are you even here? Why would you waste everyone's time
Yeah. Yeah.
missing a line? Do you even want to be an actor?
Yeah.
Do you want to be great? Is greatness something that you should strive for? Do you want to be a god? Missing your lines is not how you be a god." And then that turns into, this is because your father called you a little faggot when you were young, wasn't it? This is because you're just a pushover. You don't know what you're doing with your life. You think you're going to come in here. And then every single person in that class, he would instruct to tear that poor person down. And there are kids like me sitting there and watching this. And what you start to understand is that people are very, 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 very easy to manipulate.
Yeah.
If you are willing, if you're willing to expose and take advantage of their weaknesses, of which we all have.
Yep. Yep.
And so that was the kind of environment that I grew up in, and that my mother, and I think it's by the grace of God, because she grew up with a very loving, godly family that were very devoted. She knew that this was wrong.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
she believed, she did the meditations and I mean, one thing I loved about her, and it actually harkens now to my, just getting into the symbolic worldview. She would take my brother and I out on these long walks. We lived on 35 acres, deep, old growth forest in the middle of nowhere, Washington State. And there would be multiple meadows, and we would just sit there in the meadow, and deer would come, and she's like, "Look at that. Look at what God has made. Isn't that, do you see what he really made?"
Mhm.
Is this kind of
Yeah.
like, this is the real
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
This is truth. And there's something more here than just what you're seeing.
Yeah.
So, she had that sense. She had that sense. Um, but she also did not have the sense. And I think it was partly naivete, partly because she loved my father. She thought she could change him, as so many women do. She thought that she could be that kind of thing. She stayed with him for a long time, up to 7 years, until finally the abuse was too much that she left. And what ensued was a many-year custody battle between my brother and I. And just to give you some idea of like what she had to go through was, this is a woman that comes from a culture, completely different, who was very intelligent, spoke 7 languages, very artistic, very driven, but had no one, zero, not nobody to help her.
Yeah.
And she left. She finally left. So that's like, why didn't she leave? A lot
Yeah.
of people,
Yeah.
and I don't,
Yeah.
and I think you don't, and battered women and what they go through.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons that they don't leave.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
reasons. What's
Yep.
going to happen? What if my
Yep.
kids? What if I can't get my kids? What if,
Yep. Yep.
what will he do?
Yep. Yep.
What about the other people, not just my kids, the other people that I love and
Yep.
will still be in his orbit?
Yep.
But she finally did leave. And I mean, he was, it wasn't the abuse was severe. I mean, one of my earliest memories was um, him pinning her down and smacking her as hard as he could with his fist, and her asking, I think it was 3 at the time, Raymond, get the knife, get the knife. I need help. And so I gave her the knife, and she cut his arm from his wrist to his shoulder, elbow, and he had a scar for a long time from that, or his whole life. I'm sure he still has it now. Um, so that's the kind of abuse that we're talking about, you
Yeah.
know. And most of the time, I never saw tenderness or love. It was always fighting, screaming,
Yeah.
you know. And so that was, I mean, for my brother and I, especially my brother's 3 years younger, was especially hard because
Yeah.
we didn't have that model of a family, a real
Yeah.
family, on top of
Yeah.
all the, you know, cultic stuff. Um, there were good things though, you know, like I think that I gained a real appreciation for work and nature. You know, I woke up at 5 in the morning every morning, milked the cows, watered the plants, you know, cut wood. All of that stuff was a real, I think, like really good. I think like, and I don't do that now. Now I'm living in dirty Jersey, in Jersey City, and you know, in concrete jungle basically, and I miss that a lot. You know, of course, I didn't appreciate it when I was young, but I think that was really good. And I will say that, like, as horrible as my father was, and as evil as he became, because what I've come to realize is that these people like him, you know, what they're really doing, they convince themselves that they really do have an answer. They really do have an answer,
Yeah.
and the methods are sometimes hard.
Yeah.
The methods are hard, but if you listen to them, you'll become something. And we know a lot of great people that had fathers like that that became something.
Yeah.
And I will say that there are things that he instilled in me that that have never left me, that have benefited me
Yeah.
100%. And
Yeah.
I thank him for that. Top of the list, what not to be.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
what not to be. But at the same time, I mean, just this was the most charismatic man. Like when you spoke to him, you felt like not only did he know you like a friend, like an old friend, but he cared. He asked the questions that people didn't ask. Why are you? Who are you? Who do you want to be? What do you want out of your life? You know, and people don't have that. They don't get that. They don't get that from their priests. They don't get that from their pastors. Oftentimes, they don't get that from their parents.
Yeah.
And that is something we need to give people.
Yeah.
That's something that people need.
Yeah.
They need to be engaged on a deep level that's not superficial,
Yeah.
because that's what feeds the soul. I think that's what feeds the soul. That's what gives you meaning day to day. And he was able to do that. You know, unfortunately, he took it and made it about, well, he's a god. And what I'm doing, I create my own reality. I do my own things. And he did that. And the hedonistic impulse and the demons that consumed him really well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, my mother finally left my father. I was 7 years old at this time, and a large court battle ensued. And the problem was is that my dad had 40 people willing to attest to his great character,
Yep.
and my mother didn't.
Didn't have them.
And this goes into why I eventually became a libertarian. Now I'm like, I don't know what I am, but what I really started to realize was that the governmental system is just so beyond broke, because you know they took a lot of it hook, line, and sinker. They believed in, and I knew the
Sure.
truth.
Sure.
But in their wisdom, what they did was they they gave custody of my younger brother, who was 5 at the time, 4 at the time, to my mother. because he was young,
Yeah.
and custody of me to my father. And then I would see on weekends the parents. So my brother and I would only actually be with each other on certain weekends together,
That's
right? And
horrible.
then yeah, it's like it's absolutely
I mean,
crazy.
who would think of this?
Yeah,
As if siblings don't also have bonds, especially in a broken home where clearly bad stuff is happening. Anybody who knows anything knows that when stuff is going wrong at this level with the parents, the kids just kind of like, we need each other. And then you pull them apart. Oh,
it's a lot like Solomon, like
yes.
actually cutting the baby in two and giving the baby. Like
Yes.
I did it. See, it's fair. That's really what it was. And unfortunately, when that happened, and my mother, I mean, to give you an idea of her world, she was living in a tent with my brother at a park for 7.5 months. You know, like, and it's also crazy to think because, like, usually the woman gets a better, sweeter end of the deal on
Yeah,
these
yeah, yeah.
things.
There's all these
You know,
stories about the dude getting impoverished by
it,
his wife who's divorcing him.
exactly,
And then there's stories like this.
exactly, exactly. And my dad kept the farm, everything. By the way, my mother basically paid for all of that with like inheritance that she got from her grandmother and stuff like that. So it's just like smart's even worse, right? But like I said, he had such, I mean, he was a pillar of the community,
Sure, sure.
you know? And
Oh,
so unfortunately, what happened was that I lived with my father, and that's when, he kind of turned his sights on me, really, in a big way. And he wanted to make me, he said, Raymond, you're not going to be a gay faggot, piece of shit, nobody. You're going to be great. So how do you walk? How do you talk? How do you eat? And a lot of the time, we would have these, I mean, in some ways, it's like a struggle session where you would have me stand 4 hours in one spot. If I moved, I get slapped. And I would scream at the top of my lungs, you are God. I want to be a God. I must listen to you. And we would also talk about things like, I mean, my dad was very smart. He had memorized the DSM. It must have been four then or three. He memorized it, and he would diagnose all of his students with like this thing and that thing. And of course, I had many diagnoses too. And he was just like, "Hey, you gotta fix yourself from all this crap. You know, you gotta fix yourself, and this is the way to do it." And so, and there was also, of course, beatings, but I really preferred beatings because they were done, and then he'd usually leave me alone. But
ironic,
standing
isn't it?
there,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
but standing there and seeing those eyes, and when I think about evil, when I think about true evil, it's this. There's a banality and a pleasure in the banality because what he was really doing was killing the kid,
Yeah,
destroying the child
yeah,
to make something else,
yeah,
something stronger. Stronger, yes,
yeah.
maybe.
Sort
Also
of trying to
totally
make an
broken.
orc. That's what he's
That's
trying to do.
right.
He's trying to make an
That's right.
orc.
That's right. And you can imagine that in a pagan world where the whole society believes this, what does that society look like?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, it's inhuman,
yeah,
but you win battles.
yeah,
You're the
yeah.
top.
You
You
have an
eat the
orc army.
most.
Yep.
You eat the most. You got the biggest tents. The sharpest knives.
Yep.
You do own your reality. You do manifest your reality
Yeah.
if you're
Yeah.
like that in
Yeah.
one respect. So, I just really, I feel like I understand. And I know that there are people that have gone through way worse stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
thank God he was never sexual with me or anything like that. But,
Yeah.
you know, um, that was really difficult.
Yeah.
And that lasted for about 3 years until finally he beat me enough to hurt my arm and stuff. And I called the police as a 9-year old kid. And they
And the
took
courts
me
suddenly
and
wake up and like, oh, I guess we kind of messed
oh,
up a little
you would
bit.
think though, Paul, that
Oh
they would
no.
wake up. You would think that they would wake up, but they didn't wake up. They woke up a little bit. What they did was give custody to my mother, but I still had to visit him every weekend with my brother because it was a misunderstanding. He had all of this stuff, accident hurt. His mother is psychotic. She's implanted all of this stuff in his head about what actually happened. Blah blah blah. I mean, I'm abbreviating because it's hard to believe how crazy it
Yeah.
is. But I mean, you think of it like, how did something in the Catholic Church go the way that it did?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
how does it happen at schools
Yeah.
and you know, where it's like,
Yeah.
oh, this could never happen.
Yeah.
This guy's these people are crazy. This woman is obviously opera rocker,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
with an accent and you know can't hold down a job because she's taking care of two kids, so, you know, living on food stamps and stuff like that. So, and all the money she did make going to lawyers to fight for her kids, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that lasted for a couple more years until finally um, he beat my younger brother up one day, and I called the police again. He was actually basically drowning him in our pond, and I called the police, and that was finally enough to where the courts granted. Oh, but you'd still think something would happen, right?
Yeah, like a
But
restraining
no, he
order.
still had visitation rights, but we had to have a guardian ad litem with us when we
Yeah.
went.
Yeah.
And that's when he never saw us again because he made the decision never to see his two kids again. You know, he made the decision. Now, I'm cutting out a lot of stuff. He had other children with other people, his students. So I have a number of other siblings of various ages that are, um, you know, that are under his web to this day. But you know, it really puts into perspective how people can really get away with things if they have the will and the manipulatory power and a system that really doesn't care about the the spirit
Yeah.
but only cares about the letter
Yeah.
of the law. And I really
Yeah.
feel like, especially in certain areas, I know it's better. I'm sure if you're a rich kid in the middle of like, you know, in the middle of Princeton, you're gonna have a better time, right, with that kind of stuff. But you know, if you're in the middle of nowhere country, where how, yeah, I mean, like the town that was close to us, I was in the middle of the country, but the town that was closest to us, Centralia, was at one point the meth capital of the West Coast. You know, so like this is just like a where people just go and sink into the black hole, right? Beautiful. I think Washington State's one of the most beautiful places. There's the veneer of beauty, but the reality is much worse. So finally, my brother and I were with my mother, and you know, to give you an idea of what she did, you know, through this whole time, you know, she was fighting for us, and then one day she just was like, you know what, I'm going to go to a church. I remember my mother, Lutheran. There were no Lutheran churches like anywhere 100 miles from where we were. So she went to this small little non-denominational Bible church. She was living in a trailer at that point with me and my brother. And she went, and I remember distinctly the first time we went, and she put in, because she only had a quarter, and she put in a quarter to the giving basket. And that day we had three full boxes of food on our doorstep,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Somebody saw.
Yeah.
And they knew you guys had need.
Yeah. In my mind at that time, I was like, what? You just put in a quarter? You put in a quarter and you get this food? You know, that's how like I didn't know what was going on, right?
Sure. Sure.
Um, but you know, she started to go.
Yeah.
to this little church.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're talking 600 people in the town,
Yeah.
mostly farmsteads and trailer park
Yeah.
people. Like
Yeah.
that's the kind of people, right?
Yeah.
And also, like, just my mother, like I said, spoke 7 languages. Was, I mean, a master of her art,
Yeah.
amazing singer.
Yeah.
But you can't do that when you have 2 kids and you
No.
have no income.
No.
So she ended up working for the suicide hotline, and would basically, having from her experience, talk people away from killing themselves. Long nights, so we'd go, I remember we'd go Friday night to the suicide hotline center in the city, and she would talk for hours just there on the phone. People like, no, don't do this, blah blah blah. And it was like, what do they make, like
Yeah.
just above minimum wage?
Yeah.
But she also, wasn't content to stay there, so she ended up going to the community college, paid her way through, got a psychology degree, associates. Then she went to the famous Evergreen College in Olympia, got her bachelor's degree in psychology. The hippie college that they, um, she did that, got her bachelor's, was a straight A student, and um, eventually her master's. And while all of this was going on, a lot of things came to light with my father, finally, in one respect, where this is a funny story you'll appreciate because we're Christians, but um, he had all these students, and he was also, I forgot to mention, a prodigious drinker. I mean, 2 packs a night, Henry Weinhard's, beer kind of drinker, passing out. That's how he fell asleep, which is what you do when you can't live with what you've done, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, one day he had a performance with some of his students in the city, and they were driving home, and his student was driving, and she was drunk. He was sleeping in the back of the car, and she fell asleep at the wheel and ran into a tree. This tree had a sign on it that said, Christ died to save sinners. I'm not joking.
Of all
I'm not
trees to
joking.
hit.
Not joking. And I mean, there are a lot of trees in Washington State. There are millions of trees to hit.
That's the tree he drives
He
drunk
broke,
into.
I think, all of his limbs, smashed in half of his face. His cheek was all broken, and it disfigured him pretty badly. Uh, he got many, many surgeries. It got better, but it disfigured him. But that happened actually when we were still seeing him, after we lived with my mom, but still had visitations on weekends. And while that was happening, my mom had started going to the church and all of that stuff, and he hated that we were going to that rinky-dink Bible church that had people playing guitars and singing, "This is the day that the Lord has made." You know,
Yes.
he thought it was the stupidest thing ever, right? So that really smarted him when that happened. But finally, we were away from my with my mother. It came out in the papers. Um, One of the girls that had been my babysitter, she was 13, 14 years old, um, had come out and said that he and his common law wife at the time, Ruth, who is, two of my siblings are from her, half siblings, had been having sex with her, had taken her away from her parents, who were, by the way, all Ranthites. I know we haven't talked much about Rantha, but Rantha is part of that. Had come out and done that, and said that, and what he had done was he had basically said, "Come live with me as an apprentice. You have such an amazing voice. You can clean my house and all this stuff, and I'll teach you
You have
multiple
such
lessons a
amazing
day."
talent. Come clean my house and sleep with me and my wife. What a talent.
Yeah. Common law wife.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, and how this actually came out was that the parents at one of Ramtha's sessions with all the thousands of people there, told Ramtha on the stage what he did while my father was there. You can write some movies, right?
Right.
There's some movies
You
in
can't
here.
make this stuff up. I
You
mean,
can't make it up. You can't make it up. I'm not making this up. I swear to God, if you want to, you can find all this stuff. But um, so my father went up on the stage and was like, I was helping her. She had, I've taken what you've taught me, you know, and I'm doing it. Now, Ramtha can't have this. This is bad for business, Paul. It's really bad for business. Jay-Z had horse stables of Arabian Andalusian horses with carpeted floors and crystal chandeliers. That does not come cheap. She couldn't have that. And so she excommunicated my father for doing that. And he was no longer allowed. He was no longer allowed to pay $5,000 to go to those.
church discipline's a bitch with Ramtha.
I know. It's just sometimes you just gotta be careful, right? Can't go. I one thing. Another funny thing. I'm just coming to my mind. They had this thing called the tank, and the tank was this maze that she had built. This gigantic maze that you could only crawl in. So you crawl down, and if you made it to the center of the maze, blindfolded, you'd reach that next level. That next Scientology level of enlightenment or fate and clear or whatever. It's amazing. It's all the same stuff, right?
Yeah,
it's just we're gonna call it the tank. You're gonna go in blindfolded.
Ooh.
Another thing they would do is they would have everyone post they would all draw in the sessions, illustrate like their dream or whatever, like what they wanted to manifest. And then they would stick it on the wall and then blindfold themselves. And then the helpers would like mix you up and you wouldn't know where you were. And they say, go. And then people would like wander trying to find the wall. Sometimes they just like wander into the woods. Wander into the woods, hit themselves. Maybe they touch a cow's ass or something. Who knows, right? It's like, but I remember very distinctly my dad found his on the wall.
Wow.
And that was a big deal.
Wow.
That was a big deal.
That shows you something. It shows you
something. It shows you something.
He didn't find a cow's ass. He found his own vision board.
Maybe he looked. Maybe he didn't. Either are possible. Yeah, exactly.
A little.
Yeah.
It's like my niece once said when she was playing a game with my father, and they were playing a little game, and my father said, "No, you're not supposed to do that. You're cheating." She said, "Cheating helps me win." It's like, oh,
exactly. Like,
smart girl.
So anyway, my dad was excommunicated from Ramtha, and a big court battle ensued between this woman's parents and my father. Now, Paul, you would think that if this comes to light, that this man would be locked up and the key thrown away.
Even in the state of Washington.
Even in the state of Washington. You would think.
Sorry, but my apologies to the state of Washington, but come on, it's true.
That did not happen, though. That did not happen. And it's sad because it was the same thing at a bigger scale.
Yeah.
What happened with my mother.
Yeah.
He had all of his, and at this point he had a very capable cult.
Yeah.
Very capable stable of people willing to vouch for him. And a lot of money.
Yeah.
To fight.
Good lawyers.
And he hired actually one of the lawyers that was the same lawyer that defended the woman that had the kid, the teacher that had the kid with that,
Oh yeah,
14-year
yeah,
old. Do
yeah,
you
yeah,
remember that big
yeah,
story? It was a
yeah,
national story. He
yeah.
got that woman's lawyer and two others.
Well, often with lawyers, you get what you pay for. Keep
Yeah.
that in mind when you see those billboards of you know, I won't say the names.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And, you know, I mean, we're talking about police raided his home. They found hundreds of videos, self-made pornographic films of him that he'd taken with his students.
I love how that's so much. People are like, I'm going to commit a crime, but I'm really going to like it. So let's take pictures and videos of the crime while I'm committing it.
Obvious. Well, how do you see it again, Paul?
And of course, this happens so often. And then people are just
Yeah.
dumbfounded by, well, well, and it happens both ways. It's like, well, there's the evidence, and the court's like, well, but really, it's almost so obvious people can't believe it. Yeah, like he'd take a video of him committing that crime. Yeah, they do it all the time.
Yeah, all the time. So you'd think that would like help, but
No, no.
there were so many things, and this is where all the news articles, if you ever decide to research this stuff, the family of this girl, um, said, "Hey, this happened." They tell the courts that he admitted it in front of thousands of people at this thing. Paul, not one person from that place testified
Yeah, of course
that
not.
they saw that,
No, of course not.
except one. Except
Oh,
one. Only one was willing to testify.
wow.
Can you guess which one?
Well, the parents, obviously, but who else?
Jay-Z Knight. Now, this is where it gets
Oh,
crazy. She said, "Well, I'm happy to testify, but I wasn't there. Ransom was there."
you got to get Ramps on the stand. Come on, get Ramps on the stand.
So I will channel Ramtha in the
No,
courtroom and you will hear what happened.
no. She did this in court?
No, she didn't.
Oh,
The court said, "We will not make a mockery of this courtroom and have this person testify." So do you see like how ridiculous? I mean, this is just like clown world, like just like clown world, right?
it's insane.
But the sad thing is, and this is the problem with living in a clown's world, is that
Yeah,
people get hurt,
yeah, 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 yeah,
really hurt.
yeah,
And there's a cost.
yeah,
There's a cost to this.
yeah,
And that cost was this little girl not
yeah,
getting justice.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Because my dad, through the book, and his lawyers through the book, they did every hijink. The parents, triple mortgaged their home or something like that, but they lost everything and they couldn't do it anymore. So he was actually found guilty of, statutory rape of a minor, sexual
yeah,
misconduct, all of this stuff.
yeah.
But they were unable to actually charge him effectively. He just
Wow.
became a sexual predator,
Yeah,
blah, blah, blah.
yeah,
All of the evidence was thrown out, the tapings
yeah,
thrown out because it had been tampered with,
yeah. And then after that, he can
improperly
play the victim.
collected.
He can play the
Exactly.
victim then. See how I'm persecuted. I must be telling the truth.
And you know what got him out of that area? You know where small semblance of justice came? The people in that small town,
Oh,
the men,
yeah,
did some country
yeah,
justice.
yeah,
And they
yeah,
showed up and they said, "You and your people are out of here,
yeah,
or you'll be nowhere."
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's often how it goes.
Should happen more often.
Yeah.
I think that
Well, that's a difficult thing because again, that's also the same kind of things. I mean, huge injustices can be done in that same way
I
because
agree. I agree.
mobs, I mean, when you read the Gospels, Jesus doesn't trust in mobs because mobs are fickle. Just like we said earlier, people are not that hard to manipulate,
Yeah.
and these mobs can swing either way.
Yeah. I agree. I agree with that. What I really meant to say is like there are serious injustices happening in our society that if a few good people got together and actually did something
Yeah.
and they'd had enough, instead of leaving it to these corrupt, broken, ineffective systems, we would be better for it. And I think it's because we've kind of ceded that responsibility to the government in a way that is incorrect in our society in a lot of ways because you just have so many people falling through the cracks.
Yeah.
And it's just, yeah. But
So
anyway,
you lived with your mother, college. What did you
well,
do
I
career
mean, there's a
time?
little bit more to the story.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, it gets crazier. Yeah. Well, it's sadder. Let's say it gets sadder. A year after she finally won custody of my brother and I, she started getting a pain in her breast.
Oh no.
Yeah.
This is like
And
Angela's Ashes level stuff here.
yeah, and she was diagnosed with breast cancer
Oh
a
no.
year. Yeah, so this was my seventh grade year. And she fought for 2 years, beat it the first time, did the chemo, that whole shebang, while going to college. I mentioned she was going to college, getting 2 degrees, you know, bachelor's psychology, and then master's in psychology. And um, unfortunately, they didn't get it all, and it traveled through her lymph nodes and
Oh,
became a bone cancer and then a skin cancer. And this is really crazy, but um, you know, our lives got so much better. She really joined that church, um, became, that was what she did. And she lived for my brother and I. She was
yeah,
going to school. She
yeah,
became a cleaning lady.
yeah.
She, did the hotline stuff, got her master's degree, perfect student, perfect grades. Um, and then she died of cancer on September 11th, 2002, while I was singing the national anthem at a school choral
Oh my.
event about that. But I will say that, in those moments, what was so remarkable, and I think this was from her faith and what she found is that, even after all of this stuff, she would always say to my brother and I, love your father.
Mm,
There's a good man there. I fell in love with a good man
yeah,
in there.
yeah,
Love your father. And I
yeah,
really think that that's the Christian ethic,
yeah, yeah,
is to really view people for what they really are.
yeah,
Because the evil is just this
yeah,
rot, this corruption of what we really are,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know? And so, yeah, so she died and it was terrible because, um, we were wards of the state after she died. And by the grace of God, a family from that little Bible church,
Took
and
you
by a
in.
family, I mean, um, he was a commander in the Navy. They had two daughters when we went there, 16 and 18 or something like that. They basically went to my mother on her deathbed and they said like, we know it's going to be weird, but we're going to do everything we can to where these kids can stay with us. And, they did it. They
Wow.
actually took my brother and I in,
Wow.
and after she died, and it was like being transported into a completely different universe because what we saw, my brother and I, was an intact family, a very ordered existence, which caused a lot of problems, as I'm
Initially.
sure you can surmise. Yeah, initially,
Order? We've never known
yeah,
order.
yeah, exactly.
Where's the maze and the
Um,
blindfold and the vision? The vision.
but he had
Lords.
recently become a Christian. His name's Dennis. He had recently become a Christian after having been basically grown up in another cult, which is called Christian Scientists. I'm sure you've heard of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
His mother was very big into it. Also happened to be my piano teacher when I was a little kid, like super weird, like how things. And his sister was actually a member of my father's cult. It's like so crazy. Not that
Oh.
I'm like it's just like it happened to be that way, like
Yeah.
totally,
Yeah.
totally crazy. But he was basically discovering and devoted to the faith and really just wanted to instill that and was really living. He's a righteous man. When I think of like righteous men,
Yeah.
that's who he was, and
Yeah.
he did everything right. He asked for nothing, no money, nothing, and he treated my younger brother and I like we were his children, and
Wow.
he and his family are our family now to this
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
Um, and
Wow.
so in some ways, like all of that stuff that happened was a blessing because I don't know what would have happened if
Yeah.
my mother had lived or whatever, like
Yeah.
what would I be? Who would I be? Like,
Yeah.
what kind of value system would I have?
Yeah.
I was an angry, angry kid, you know,
Could
very,
imagine.
very,
Yeah.
very troubled kid, really resentful, of things. And then your mother dies, who was like the only rock you had and you'd known. I had a chip on my shoulder, and I thought the whole God thing and everything was just complete and utter BS,
Yeah.
you know. But we saw by the way they lived the Christian, the Christian ethic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so by the grace of God, we got to have a family like that. And, you think of like Abraham and what it must have been like to be part of a righteous man's clan and
Yeah.
how that filtered down
Yeah.
to now, like
Yeah.
what effects I have, and just to have a glimpse of that, I think was so salvific
Yeah.
for my younger brother and I.
Yeah.
Warts and all, it was not easy. I mean, if I didn't make my bed, the guy would take it apart and put it back together in the yard, and like, it was like boot camp, you know. So it was not easy, but it was necessary, you know. So I went to college for, of course, music, following in my family. That's all I knew. I mean, I
Yeah.
didn't mention this, but like the only thing we were allowed to listen to was classical music in the home with my father. Like everything else was garbage,
Yeah.
like not even worth. So like I grew up like Wagner and this guy. Like this is like the height of which maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but um, yeah. So I was just kind of steeped in that. Um, and so I went to study music in college, and in college, just to kind of wrap up kind of where my dad, that situation went. I got a message when I think I was a sophomore or junior in college from this woman in New Jersey. And she said, hey, I'm sorry to message you, but my brother just killed himself. He was like he was a member of your father's thing here in Jersey. He started this like acting and singing school, and like I don't know what to do, and like he's has a bunch of people like with them, and like how do I get out of this? And So he basically started it up again in New Jersey, and I tried to help, but this person was troubled too. She was troubled. And eventually what I heard was, and then crazily, I was doing this competition, this singing competition in Philadelphia, and I ended up meeting this woman, and my car needed to be jumped, and I randomly asked this girl that was there, like, "Hey, can you jump my car? Do you have a car here?" She jumped me. We were talking. Ends up, she had just left a year before my father's studio, and we had talked. I mean, like so crazy. We talked for like 7 hours walking through Philadelphia about like her, and she basically told me that he had basically started the whole thing up again, but was now a millionaire because he had convinced two people to sign their trust away to him as the executor, and was living in a mansion in near Montclair, New Jersey. And that's what I know to this day. I have an older brother
Wow.
that's still with him, younger sister, and a younger brother who has Down syndrome that are still in that orbit. So
Wow.
it's really sad. It's
Wow.
yeah, it's what I realize is like, this is why there's justice
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
next life.
Yeah. 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 That's right. Because it doesn't all get sorted out in this one.
It's
I
not.
promise you that.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I went through college, got my bachelor's, master's in music, voice pedagogy, which is teaching instruction, and that. Um, and then I did the professional singing thing for about 10 years, um, which, I mean, I'm a good singer. I'm okay. I'm an all right singer. My brother actually is an amazing singer. Still now sings at Carnegie Hall, stuff like that. Like sings for movies and stuff. He's an amazing guy, but I just hated the business.
Yeah.
It's so anti-Christian.
Yeah.
It's so, everything about it just
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I hated being gone for months. So when I
Yeah.
got married to my wife, I kind of made the decision like, but throughout all this, I was always interested in technology, and I like high school, I built my own computers and, loved tinkering around with software and stuff like that. And so I always had like a side gig. I started a couple businesses doing stuff like that. And then when I when I got married to my wife, I kind of got into the business startup world thing and started a couple businesses, successfully exited a few of them, crashed and burned a few of them. And now I'm on my latest one, which is Resonance, which is like a SaaS platform for the creative industry that helps organizations manage their business operations and event venues and stuff like that, attracting stuff like that. So that's what I do now.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
And that is how I got.
how did you get into orthodoxy?
Oh, yeah. So, I became, this is the next part of the story, I guess, is that I became a Christian basically in senior year of high school,
Yeah.
really. Um, and, we were a Bible church, non-denominational. The
Yep.
Bible is the word of God,
Yep.
young earth creationism,
Yep.
the
Yep.
whole, the whole,
Yep.
the whole.
Yep.
And I ended up believing that hook, line, and sinker, the whole thing. And always was going to church.
Yeah.
Church was a very important part. I always tried to find a small Bible church
Yep.
in college and stuff like that. Always went to church. Got very, very into R.C. Sproul and John MacArthur and John Piper and these guys, like big, young, restless,
Young, less
reformed,
reformed. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like very much that. Sorry, my
Yeah.
camera's just a second. Yeah, that's better. Anyway, and so I really love because another thing my father instilled in me, like he was always talking about philosophy, ancient ways of thinking and stuff like that. So I always had a very interest in that kind of stuff, really delving deep into that stuff. I think one of the positive things that he gave me was an inquisitive mind. really wanting to get into the depth, the heart of things. And I really found, Reformed theology an amazing system for that.
Yep.
I think, I think like, um, I'll say it this way. I think if you're living in a Western world and you're having a Christian ethic where your holiness is reflected in your life in a very material, I don't want to say materialistic way, but in a material way. Like, you know, the white picket fence and kids and, an ordered place. I think that it's great for that. Really great. The puritanical thing. I think that's good for that. For that. I don't know. We'll see what happens with the great experiment as it comes to its close. But yeah, I was really into that. And I would say that, I loved debating people, just you say people didn't like me. They really didn't like me when we had I was one of those guys, Mark Driscoll guys, that could argue from any verse, the system,
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
tulip, all of that,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
You
yeah.
know better than anyone, I'm sure.
Probably not than
Um,
anyone, but I know it.
yeah. Um, but as I got older, I I had a problem with what I was kind of seeing in my day-to-day life,
Mm.
in my church. I went to Redeemer in New York. That's where my
Oh,
wife and I got
hmm,
married.
hmm.
Tim Keller was,
Yeah.
at that point, he wasn't a full-on pastor. We had, there were three. We went
Yep.
to Redeemer
Yep. And
downtown.
it was
We were
kind
one
of a
of the,
lottery if you get to hear Tim, because
yeah,
they
exactly,
they wouldn't let
exactly,
they wouldn't let
exactly,
anybody know exactly in which Redeemer and which service Tim was preaching in, because then everybody comes
exactly.
to that
Because
service.
yeah,
Oh,
anyone
we've
will
got
go there.
the
Yeah,
we've got the
and
Tim
I ended up becoming a worship song leader
Oh, okay.
there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so
Because they
we
liked,
I did.
they liked good music and art and
Yeah.
yeah,
And one of my
yeah.
good friends is still the music director at downtown. But yeah, so I was just we had a CG group, we led a CG group. We were in,
Yeah.
we were in the Redeemer. And because I know I've watched many of your videos and you say, talk about Tim Keller a lot. And I mean, it's 100% true. I mean, the guy can preach. The guy can preach. And I mean, you would always have a sense at the end of his sermon, like, it all makes sense when I'm a Christian.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. He pulled it nicely together.
You
Absolutely.
know, and he also, because of the mission of the church in the city, really tried to make the ministry aspect of the city applicable to your life living in the
Yep,
city.
yep,
You know,
yep, yep.
so a lot of like the finance people get together, the artist people get together. They have events and stuff like that, and I think that was all great. It was all great, but as that was happening, and as kind of the zeitgeist was changing in our culture, I was a conservative guy. I think dumb Republican in my early years. 100% for the Bush, the Bush stuff until Ron Paul came, and then I like went on that boat, and you know how insufferable those guys were. Yeah,
Talk about a cult.
yeah, I think about call. Yeah, yeah, but they were right. No, I'm kidding. Uh, um, so yeah, so I got really into the libertarian thing, which is really works really well with like reformed theology. There's a lot of like synergy there, I think,
Boy, this is
with
going to birth a
thinking.
few comments.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And maybe just mine, but I think just like really worked well with where I was.
Well, the Reformed,
But
for what's a lot attractive to a lot of people about the Young, Restless, and Reformed, and just Reformed theology in general, it's a very systematic worldview,
yes,
and it's birthed in and helped birth the modern era,
exactly.
and everything is tightly packed into this system, and that system is deeply attractive in many ways.
And you can't argue with some of the results,
Right?
like air
Yeah,
conditioning
yeah,
and
yeah.
not people not starving.
America.
And
You know, it
yeah,
is the
exactly. You know,
it is the religion of America, or at least
yeah,
was. It's the religion that founded America.
yeah. I
At
mean,
least part of it. Yeah.
I mean, it's the enlightened. It's the thing that made the Enlightenment. You know,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Many other things, but you know, access to the printing press and you know the individual to actually come to things, reason things out, logic things out themselves, and I think that if you live in that system, I think if you live in the reform system, it's unassailable in a lot of ways. I think
Yep.
that
Yep.
if you live in the system, because I'm out now, but I think if you live in the system, and I'm pleased if I'm being in any way
Oh,
a
keep going. You're
tribal, but
fine. I'm
yeah,
gonna
yeah,
get
yeah.
another water bottle. Keep
Um,
talking.
yeah, please, please, please. But yeah, so the big thing that was kind of starting to stir my soul was how the zeitgeist of the world was really starting to change, you know, and we were kind of all witnessing that, you know, the wars that were happening overseas, you know, the mindlessness of our governments, where things were going, you know, the social fabric of our society is starting to deteriorate. You know, these lines are being drawn. And I kind of found myself at war with a lot of things. Like, you know, some people, you know, being a libertarian, it was funny in that the Douglas Murray Dave Smith debate. One of the funniest lines that Douglas Murray had
Yeah.
with him was, you know, libertarians are like bisexuals. Like, come on, just pick a side, you know,
That's
like
right.
because you're like super anti-war. You know, Palestine is the good guy, but on the other side, we you can't ever have a single thing. Roads are anathema, things like that. I'm
Right,
joking.
right. Oh yeah,
But
I've known some hardcore libertarians.
yeah,
That can get really weird too.
yeah, yeah. And I was real weird. I mean, ANCAP all the way. And I still think that there are certain principles of it that are 100% correct. But yeah, what I started to kind of realize in my walk as a Christian was that I was always here
Hmm.
and I felt holy when I understood things. Does that make sense?
Yes, oh,
Like
it makes perfect sense.
yeah, if I understood this correctly, if I
Right,
had it right,
right.
then I was good.
Yes, yes.
And good also had a different quality. Good was I was in the right camp.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was I was elect.
Yeah, yeah. Heads on sticks. And it's as long as you can just sort of keep that system in your head and sort of live right in that in sort of this timeless moment and be right in terms of all of the systems in there, then, you know, that is the kingdom of God, sort of that living in that headspace and
Yes.
being right about those things.
Yeah, and if everyone is that way, we can reconstruct the world.
Yeah.
And
In
then you
our
get into
heads.
Christian Reconstructionism,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
Hobbesian, you know, all that stuff. Like
Yep.
that all will, that will, the kingdom of God, we bring it here.
That's right. That's
We
right.
bring it here, we manifest it, and we'll know we're right when everyone is not hungry. You know, everyone treats everyone correctly. Everyone knows that you know is individualized and
That's right.
actualized in the proper way, in the Christian way.
You
You
just
know,
have to
but
go
we
a
just
little bit east from Washington State, and that's where you'll find
exactly,
it.
exactly. But you have to understand. You have to understand the faith. And what I started to realize was my understanding of the faith really had no bearing on how I lived it out.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Very little bearing.
yeah. Yep. James K. Smith called it heads on sticks. And that reformed system can really produce that. It can produce other great things. Don't get me wrong. I'm still reformed,
100.
but
Yeah.
but there's a certain way, and that's sort of the shadow side of that system is it can become heads on sticks and the system, and yeah, and then it produces exactly that.
Yeah. And with that, I also saw that kind of reflected in our church and in how Redeemer was kind of being holy in New York City, Manhattan. And it didn't look very different from the rest of Manhattan.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
basically just polite people that try to be good at their jobs. But what really set us apart from the world?
yeah,
Really?
yeah,
Yes, we're not sleeping around. Yes, we're not, we're not like all the things, right? There's definitely 100% way to live, the Christian ethic, all of that. But it wasn't really different. Then Jordan Peterson came into the picture. And what I really appreciate about Peterson that he did for me is that he broke the fundamentalist in me.
yep, yeah, yeah,
You know, I was like, Earth is 6,000 years old, 100% 6,000 years old, maybe 10, depending on how you count. Right now, I'm not a evolutionist per se, but I'm also willing to have that conversation.
hmm,
I'm willing to say that, there's a mystery here. And it's not, the Bible is not a scientific textbook that tells you, all the scientific secrets if you just like pour into it enough. That's not how it works. And I think that Peterson was really great for me in that. A lot of other things that he did was great, was just kind of bridging that gap of like, hey, these stories resonate in a way that are bigger than this very narrow view that the modern man has of them, you know? And on top of that, I was really wrestling with, I think that the main things that people that start questioning, like hell, like, what is hell? How could a good God just like predestine people to burn forever? And so I really started wrestling for years. I was wrestling with that. And I was starting to read church fathers and stuff like that. And I ended up being like, whoa, there are guys that are like conditional immortality. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's like, that God is going to just destroy, annihilate the people that are not,
yeah,
you know. But that also didn't sit really well with me. Like, there's something wrong about that because the Bible's pretty clear that they're still there, that there's things about that. And so I was really wrestling with that. And Peterson, and also just the whole idea of predestination didn't really. I started to feel that there were seams that were bursting in my mind, my logical mind, and my logical, and I'd say emotional mind. And then I ended up becoming a William Lane Craig Molinarian, like Molinism,
yep,
you know,
yep,
possible worlds and counterfactuals and
yep,
um, stuff like that. And that kind of set me back on the track a little bit. I'm like, I can live with this. I can live with this. I can live with this. And then I actually came across a man called Michael Heiser. I'm sure you've heard of him.
yep,
He wrote this big treatise on the unseen realm. Is the name of the book, and raising Herman. And what he really did was open my eyes to just how fundamental the spiritual aspect of, and by spiritual aspect, I mean, I always knew that there were spirits in a divine realm in a way, but just like how important it is. Because I really think that, especially Protestants, especially certain sects, I mean, spirit world, like,
yeah,
is
yeah,
that, what is that?
right, right.
You know, like some are Pentecostals. You could even argue that Pentecostals aren't even Protestants. They're like a whole new thing. That maybe they've like, they've like adopted a spiritual worldview of like a
Right.
reality of the spiritual world. But one thing I do think, Redeemer,
Pentecostals are fundamentally anti-modernists. That's
yes,
really
yes,
so
yeah, it's very interesting.
Pentecostalism isn't really a theological tradition as much as
Yes.
it's an anti-modern tradition that looked at modernism and said, no. And in fact, we're going to say no in a really hard way against you. And why don't you read
Yeah.
this present darkness? And we've got them flying all
Yeah,
over.
which I loved. I loved all that. I read all that, David Peretti and stuff. Like,
Yep.
I love that stuff. Yeah, it was great. But like day to day, did I actually think it was like that? No, not really. Not really. Um, but I read that, and that really, and this was during the whole Peterson thing. That really like started to shift kind of like what I viewed the gospel to be, and what Christ's mission was. And one thing that really doesn't sit me one thing that really didn't sit with me well in the Calvinist worldview is that there is an element of God losing
Mm.
people.
Yeah. 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 Yep.
There's an element of chaff,
Yep. Yep.
and that's it's just very hard for me to square the chaff thing
Yep. Yep. Yep.
for God.
Yep.
And what Michael Hyde started me on was that, oh, Jesus doesn't lose. He's a conqueror. He's a conqueror of the absolute evil that had come into the world post flood after it had been wiped out, and how was he going to do that? And that what he had come to do was win through people's hearts the geography of the world, and that was a very different frame for me than penal
Mhm.
substitutionary atonement. Now, I'm
Mhm.
not saying you couldn't be a penal substitute, believe in that without um, having that, a view, but it does make the focus a little bit different, I think, as you delve into it and
Yep.
take it seriously.
Yep.
And so after that happened, and the whole Jordan Peterson thing, and while this Peterson thing was going on, I was also like, wait, is Christianity just like the best story? Is that actually what it is? Is it really? And that's, I think, the biggest danger for someone like Peterson is that people just kind of swallow the best pill that Nietzsche made for us. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's just like it's kind of like, I don't know if you ever read Watchmen, Alan Moore
No.
comic. Anyway, like at the end, spoilers, everybody. But at the end, what the villains, the trick that he does is that he like creates this like squid monster from another world. And he tricks the world into coming together to go against this squid monster, and it creates world peace because he creates this like other
Right.
that forces
Right.
unity.
He sort of
You
understood
know
Rene Girard and said, "Oh,
exactly,
if we had a squid
the
monster,
ultimate scapegoat.
the ultimate scapegoat, that would finally bring unity to the world." Yep. Yep. Yep.
Exactly,
Yep.
exactly. And I think that the danger with someone like Peterson is that, and I mean, I don't know his motivations at all. This is just what I'm saying is like, if his motivations are bad, if he's the kind of person like my dad, and I'm not saying he is, but if he's the kind of person like my dad that has just a longer term view of what good is, maybe, or like a bigger view of like how to win or influence people
Yeah.
or whatever,
Yeah.
maybe a more noble view. It's still a lie,
Well, I think
right?
I think you're right in that for Peterson, it is the greatest story. I mean, it was just on Joe Rogan. You'll hear him say this a lot, say it a lot in connection with ARC. And so I think to a degree for Peterson, he sort of seems, he sort of sees late modern civilization as the pinnacle, and woke was sort of the corruption of that. And so he wants to sort of reinstantiate late modern civilization. And the way to do that is to shore up Christianity, not necessarily, yeah, you can have the institutions and the art and the practices. Those are part of the whole thing. But all of that again is kind of in service to late modern civilization. And
Yeah,
so
it's
we
will to power, but a Christian
yeah,
will to
yeah,
power.
yeah, in some ways.
What I'm saying is that, like, hey, adopt this. This is how we win.
Yes, yes, yes. And this is what works.
Yeah, this is
Peterson
what.
is a
Yeah, this is what works.
pragmatist, and he
Nietzsche
said
was
that,
wrong. Nietzsche was wrong because he thought Christianity didn't reflect human nature correctly, right? Strong against the weak, all that. That's wrong. What's actually right is, living for other people and, like, sacrificing to the
right.
highest
Yep, yep,
ideal. But is this real, or
right.
is this the story that we're being told?
Yeah, I would say Peterson says it's real. I think he thinks it's
Yeah,
real, but it again, in terms of the telos, it's you're finally trying to get back to this ideal, which was maybe 1999 before the wokesters kind
exactly,
of ruined everything.
exactly. So anyway, but I brought this up, and I'm really not trying to cast any aspersions to Peterson or
No,
anything
I
like that.
understand.
But what I'm saying is that I was kind of like, is that what's happening here? Like, is that Christianity? Like, have I just kind of sucked myself into a cult of thinking,
Yeah,
like that?
another cult of
But
thinking.
yeah, exactly. And I'm always very aware of these things,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah.
what am I doing here?
You should be very aware of cultish
Yeah,
behavior given
exactly,
how
exactly.
you
I
were
think so. I
raised.
think so.
It's like,
I
oh,
think
people
so.
can
I could
really
also be
fall
really
into
bad
this.
at it too. So,
Yeah.
but I think reading people like Heiser, and then I came in contact with Girard and, you know, other. One of the biggest books that I read, very, very. It was like maybe 3 or 4 months before I discovered Orthodoxy and Jonathan Pajot and all of that stuff, was Saving the Appearances
Oh
by
yeah.
Owen
Yeah.
Barfield.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And reading that book, it really, it like, it shocked me because what I realized was I was living inside a very small telescope, and I was looking through the world in this with this very limited view of things that I just took as presuppositions,
Yeah.
you know, and to think how a medieval or an ancient person viewed the world when they looked up at the stars. And when they looked at the stars, what they saw, and I don't mean saw as in what when the light hits your eye, right? What they saw was the angels circling, creating a unity of meaning that actually had a bearing on
Yeah.
how I lived my life day after day.
Yeah. The discarded image. I don't know if you've read that by Lewis.
Yes, yeah,
That's what they saw. They saw that discarded
exactly.
image. Yeah.
And that really started me going like, whoa, like, how does, what is it like to be like that? How do you get there? How do you even get to that? And I would say providentially, um, you know, I started kind of investigating that whole thing, which was really just totally, I was blinded to it in some way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think part of it was just we in the West, and especially America, we just have no reason to investigate anything like that.
Yeah.
We have this manifest destiny idea of what the right kind of life and the right kind of, how to live is the right way. That's
Yeah.
just what it is.
Yeah.
And you can't argue with it because people aren't dying of starvation, and,
Yep. Yep. Yep.
there's medicine and stuff like that. So
And it
why
looks
even
really
go there?
good. It looks really
Yeah,
good. I mean, if you are successful, I mean, this is interesting, especially in connection with your father's cultish behavior, because all of those cults leverage a certain vision of the good life. And you're
right.
selling that because you're saying if you have a lot of money, if you have a lot of fame, if you have a lot of status and reputation, well, that's what the good life is. And you've had an opportunity to And I'm not saying everyone with status and reputation and wealth has gotten it the way your father has, but
Yeah, yeah,
it's many that vision of the good life continues to sell as long as, again, you don't actually achieve it and begin to realize, hey,
exactly.
wait a minute. Um,
This doesn't
and
fulfill me.
that's right. I've already been on TV say I'm going to, I've been to Disneyland and it didn't, do I have to go to Disneyland again? Because, and then especially, I mean, it's sort of the Jordan Hall thing. Once you get to the top and you look around, you
Yeah,
realize, oh, wait a minute, this is not like I thought the inner ring was supposed to be.
exactly.
And then
It's a
suddenly,
bunch of broken people that have no idea what they're doing.
right. And they're just as scared and frantic and
Exactly.
beholden to their vices as the dude sleeping over in front of the bus stop.
That's
And then
right.
you're
Exactly.
suddenly like, wait
And
a
that guy in the
minute.
bus stop might have something worked out a little bit better than them.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And once you start to see that, you begin to say, hmm, maybe maybe that ladder just goes to the top of a much longer wall. And when you actually get face to face with the wall and realize there's no more up on the ladder,
Yeah.
then suddenly you're going to have to get a new plan and find something else. No, that's very true.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, saving the appearances. How did the ancient view the world? What was, that the enchantment thing that's become almost a cringe meme at this point
Yeah.
in the TLC. Um, that
Yeah.
really grabbed me in a big way. And then I got COVID. Um, and now it's probably obvious, but I was on the side of like, fuck all these government people. I don't believe a single word that they're saying to me. I'm never getting the jab, all of this stuff, right?
Right.
That I was on that side of things, obviously, right?
Obviously.
And I was also seeing in our church just this really what I would say is an insidious change in the leadership and priority.
Hmm.
And it was really disheartening because and I don't want to speak ill of anyone, but like one of the things that really it was crazy was that, first if they shut things down, which I was against, like now there's no community. Great. Everyone is scared. Everyone is alone. And now the one place where people could get something, we're also shutting that down. Like, what are we doing? And then on top of that, then we opened up, and because I was a worship leader, I could go, but as you remember, the restrictions, like if you weren't vaccinated, you couldn't go into certain places. But if you lived in New Jersey, there was a loophole because the elites that owned all the NBA stars and stuff like that had made a loophole that if you lived in New Jersey and just came to work, you didn't have to be vaxxed. So I got
State of
through
my
the loophole.
birth. New
Yeah,
Jersey.
exactly.
Always a
Yeah, exactly.
loophole.
But the point being is that I didn't have to get vaxxed to go and serve, doing these virtual live streams. But like all of my friends that lived in the city did have to be, but I was still allowed to be there because what we didn't actually care about the health or whatever. It was just following the rules. Like no one cared.
Yeah.
And then what they ended up doing when they did have live is that they segregated the vaxxed people from the unvaxxed people. So the vaxxed people could sit downstairs and you literally, if you were unvaxxed and you had to fill out a questionnaire every Sunday when you went in, if you were unvaxxed, you had to go sit up in the second level apart from everybody.
The COVID Jim Crow.
And I was just like, hey, like at first it's like, okay, yeah, obviously you're doing this because you want to be safe, maybe. Like
But if
that's
the
where you're going.
vaccine worked, why would you be afraid of the unvaxxed?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like all of this stuff, but like I'm just trying to like be charitable. Like, obviously they're getting like pushback from all sides of people like, you shouldn't let people in the building. You're killing people if you let them in the building. You know, like I understand what they were dealing with. But what I realized with the leadership and what I ended up saying to them, you know, was like, look, you're not doing this because you care about people's health or whatever. You're following the rules because it could jeopardize what you have at the cost of the community. And I don't know if you know this, but like with COVID, like 60% of the people never came back.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, of
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I would say like the anti-vax or that crowd, you know, they
Oh,
just never came
it
back.
was kind of a lose-lose for churches in many ways because
Yeah.
whatever way you went, you were going to lose 40% of your people. Um,
Yeah.
and I saw churches just hung up on that. No,
Yeah.
there was a time during COVID when it was that way hard, and it was a lose-lose.
Yeah. And I mean that you got to hand it to the demons. Like they knew what they were doing, you know, they knew exactly what to do to divide, you know. Um, but what that really did for me when all of that was happening was I was like, wow, I'm considering leaving this church.
Mm,
Where am I going to go? I'm going to go to this church that agrees with me more. Well, hold on. I'm a piece of shit. I'm a piece of shit. What if I'm wrong? You know, what are my kids going to grow up in?
yeah, yeah,
And I think really what it put in was like, under whose authority am I going
hmm,
to be under?
hmm,
Under whose authority? Because up until that point, it had been under my authority
yeah,
where I went
yeah,
and what I agreed with, what
yeah,
theological suppositions that I had, and all of these stuff. It was my authority. And I had put myself under the authority of, you know, Redeemer
yep, yep, yep,
until it didn't serve me anymore, until
yep,
it didn't agree with me anymore.
yep,
And then, whoop, I'm out.
yep, yep,
And then I
yep,
looked back at all of the churches that I had been a part of, non denominational. I'd say 50% of them had split into different churches.
yep,
The one that my mother went to, it split over drums and like you know,
yeah,
stuff like that. It had
yeah,
split.
yeah.
And what I realized is like, wow, the church that I'm a part of right now will not exist in 30 years.
Hmm, hmm,
It may not even resemble in any way something that I would recognize in 30 years. What does that mean? So this was all happening, and I got COVID, and which is like the irony is hilarious because it really got me. You know, I'm a big guy, as you remember, very, you know, orca fat, and the Chinese developed this virus to really get us good. You know, I'm half joking, but go to covid19.gov and you see I'm right now. But I got really sick, the sickest I've ever been in my life. I couldn't eat for 5 days. I had gastric, you know, out both ends stuff. And I was basically for the first time in my life completely bedridden with nothing to do but read and watch YouTube. And, you know, I read a lot of church history. I'd been reading stuff like that happened a lot more. But I came across this video of this guy named Jonathan Pageau, and he was talking about the symbolism in Genesis. Actually, he just re-released this video yesterday, and I watched it, and I was like, "Whoa, who is this guy? What, you know, Barfield? This guy's like Barfield. That's what I thought. Like this guy's like Barfield and Lewis, like what they were talking about. Like this is incredible." And then I was like, Orthodox Christian. And I was like, Orthodox Christian? Are they? Do they even believe in the Trinity? Like that's how like a big of a blind spot I have,
yeah,
you know. And I have sung in like every single, kind of church. I was in a synagogue, but for some reason, I had never encountered Orthodoxy in any way.
That's not too hard to understand, though, in the United States. I
Yeah,
mean,
I know, especially in
especially if
America.
you're as a singer.
Yeah,
I mean, because you're not going to get
yeah,
invited to sing in an Orthodox church just because you're a good singer. You can go to a
yeah.
mega church, you can go to how many other mainline, you can go to all these churches, but the
Well, as a
Orthodox,
singer, you won't even take the job because the Orthodox sing for 6 hours in a service, and you're like,
exactly.
you're never going to pay me enough money for that.
Right.
So,
And it
yeah.
doesn't I don't want to offend anybody, but it doesn't really it doesn't really matter how good you sing to sing in an Orthodox church. Sorry, just saying.
Well, it really matters if you want to have a good
That's
time. Depends how holy you are. Uh, and you say that it's funny you say it because now I sing all the time in
right.
my Orthodox church, right?
Why everybody's going to want to go to your Orthodox church because
Oh, no, no,
at
no,
this
no, no,
Orthodox church, they got
no,
someone who
no,
can really sing.
no. but but it was just a blind spot to me, and I found out about the Orthodox Church, and I was like, whoa, wait, there was like another non-Catholic big group, you know?
Yeah.
And I'd already been kind of like discovering like the different way that the fathers had spoken about the church, and that had been happening, as this stuff was happening with Redeemer, and I was kind of investigating. But it started to really, really, as I delved deeper and deeper, and especially the symbolic thinking that Pajot gave, and then reading some of the church fathers, Life of Moses, Gregory Nyssa, and Saint Maximus the Confessor, who is now my patron saint. When I read them, what I realized was, whoa, Christianity is so grand. It's so grand. And it's so, and I mean this really, truly in a qualitative sense. It's so Catholic. It encompasses so much. As a Calvinist, if I thought about an Indian Hindu, it was derision. I had a derisive posture towards them and what they did. Now, when I think about them, I'm thinking, wow, these guys really have a symbolic view of things. They just serving the wrong God. And there's truth there. There's truth there. It's just pointed in the wrong place. And that goes for everything, every system of belief. Christianity can encompass and baptize it or bring out the truth of it. And I'm not saying I'm a perennialist. I hope that's not coming across. What I'm saying is that Buddhists burn incense, in front of their idols. And the Christian Orthodox burn incense in front of a saint or at the altar. Why? What is the fundamental symbolic aspect of reality that both of those people are participating in? And why doesn't all of Christianity do that? Why are we not participating in that? And I think when I finally decided to go to the church, and my first experience with it was very negative, actually. I was like, why are we standing? Does it have to be this long? The choir was terrible, like, like absolutely horrible, as you were saying. Um, it was not a great experience, but what I did appreciate was that the people that were there, and especially I think for me, it was the clergy that were there, they understood something, or it's not understanding. It's like they were doing something meaningful, and even the cradle Orthodox people that just go, every Sunday because that's what they did. That's their culture. Yeah, everyone has these things, right? Like, maybe they didn't understand any of it, but they did it, right? And as I went, for a couple months, it was actually that participation in a life of this organism that is the church that really sold me. And I think, when I'm thinking about like what I was missing in Protestantism, or what wasn't really being done well, and I say this, like my family back home that took me in, that I told you about, they are living literally the best form. They've created a school, a Christian school that's thriving. You know, I think they have 150 kids now after 2 years. They started their own church. They are lights in the community. They're doing good things. I do not want to denigrate what they are doing. You know, um, what I think now is, man, if they just had the wisdom of this 2,000-year institution that has really taken as a given a sacramental view of life in every aspect, and embrace the life of Christ. I mean, we just got done with Pascha, Holy Week, and I sang, near 50 hours of music. I'm still a little hoarse. But when you go through that, when you sit down after the final note that's sung in the Paschal service, you have traveled with Christ through something. And you feel in some infinitesimal way part of that experience. And that is being a part of the body of Christ. When we were singing some of those hymns, where else on earth, where can you sing a melody that a third century Christian sang? The same melody. Completely different life, different way of thinking, culture, everything different. But in that moment, I am participating in the same way with that person. What else is that? What else is that? Where else? Maybe a family, you could say, raising a family and stuff, you can kind of that. But I'm saying, like, where it's like exactly in that moment, the two are joined, where you are part of the body of Christ that has no time and no place except forever. And the church, I having now experienced it, needs to reflect that. And that doesn't mean material good. That doesn't mean that you're going to beat the barbarians at the gates when they come for you. That doesn't mean air conditioning and all that stuff. All that stuff's great. That's wonderful. But that's not meaningful in that extra sense. Like, let's say, Jordan Hall is right, and things come unraveled, and I think he is right. Things come unraveled, and we end up creating these monastic orders or whatever that kind of run the world. And I think that's actually a great way that we could recover some things. But what's actually going to last is the wisdom of the body of Christ in those moments. It's not going to be the smoke machines and the pop melodies. And I don't want to denigrate those things. Those things have their place. But what is actually going to last? Why did those people preserve that stuff? Why did they do it? It's because they realized that they're living in some way like Christ lived. And that's what the church calendar is. And I finally realized after a year going as a canon, I was like, whoa, we're actually living the life of Christ, actually doing it, in reality. And we're the things that are most important in his life, we remember and we participate in. And then if you take that to the next level is that all of this living, all of this participation that we're doing here is the participation of the new heavens and the new earth that is living outside of time and is in some way funneling itself into each church that does it. The angels are there. The tree and the water of life is coming down. from the New Jerusalem, and we are participating in that reality now. Are we in that ultimate reality? No, but that's where the saints are. That's what the saints are doing. When we pray and intercess, it's because we're praying and intercessing. That when they're intercessing for us, they are participating in that reality. And the holy men and women that live their lives on this in this mortal coil and get to that point, I think when I think about like what is actually the best way to, what's the most powerful argument for orthodoxy? Because I really think the big problem with our world and where we're at is that in the West, and I'll just say the modern West, in the Christian modern West, most of the time it's about knowing the good. And I would say in the East, or the Christian East, or what I would say is the fullness of Christianity, it's about being as much. And I am not saying that there are Christians that are not being. Like I said, I think that the people that took me in and my brother in are being that, and they're righteous and all of these things, right? But I think there are levels to being. There's levels of participation. And I truly believe that in Orthodoxy, that participation is the one that reflects it most, in where we are. And at the end of the day, the theology and all of that stuff, yeah, okay. All right, that's super important. Yes, God, three persons in one, Trinity. That said, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, that is said, hundreds of times in the liturgy. We're keeping the theological torch lit, but at the same time, we're living. No, you're not going to go to this game or whatever. You're going to go to the Vesper service and pray before you take communion in the morning. Because when you're going to communion, you're standing in front of that chalice and you've confessed your sins to your spiritual father, who has also sacrificed his life and money and time, to just basically wearing dresses all day and like fiddling around in the back with like special knives and stuff. Like, what's happening here? It's participating in the sacramental reality, right? That when you go up in front of that chalice, you are becoming like God. Becoming like God. You're not God himself, like my dad, unfortunately, was trying to tell people, right? But you get to participate in the being of God on this earth. And the height of that participation is consuming his body and his blood. And it's more real than any real a materialist would tell you. You are what you eat. We say that flippantly sometimes, but I think that the church takes that as seriously as anything, because what that really means is that you become what you consume. When you eat things, and I'm a great example of eating the wrong thing a lot of the time or too much of it, that reflects in you. But if you eat the right thing, that will also reflect in you. And what if everyone else is participating? Because when you eat, it gives you life. And how you eat and where you do it will have a bearing on how you order your life and your society and what you do day to day. That is why, my family, and I feel so blessed that my wife, came with me and we were able to baptize both of our kids. And, my daughter gets to take communion with me. My infant son gets to take communion with me, because it's not about what we understand. It's not about having the right things. It's not about having said any prayer or whatever. It's about being as a unit, as a diverse set of individuals, one in a single moment, and participating in ultimate reality. And that is so grand. It is so grand. It's so grand that someone like Tolkien or Lewis can write a mythos like Narnia or Lord of the Rings. And I think, when we think about things like that, those are the grandest stories there are, right? In some respect. Christianity is way grander. It's so big. And what we are, like Lewis said, that great quote, beings of light, that we would fall down on our faces in front of, that's what we are supposed to be, participating in God. And unfortunately, as we go through this grand experiment where individualism has become the highest ethic, right? Where multiplicity is on the top of the hierarchy instead of unity, everyone's their own God. And my father was a reflection of living that ethic as much as he was able to do. Some people are way better at it, like Stalin or Hitler or these people, right? They take it as far as they can go. It's smaller for me. It's smaller for other people. Maybe it's just a family that's being ruled in that way, where the man treats himself like the god of the family, right? In the wrong way. But I think in orthodoxy and holy orthodoxy, I mean, I want to just say Christianity, like what you're just doing is being God's image, the imager of God at all times and places in his church. I think it was Maximus the Confessor, or it may be someone else that says that all of creation is God's raiment, the thing that he clothes himself with, and we are part of that raiment in some way. And in a material way, the center of that, or the skin of God. Anyway, hopefully that was one question you had.
That was
I don't even
awesome. That
know.
was awesome. That was a wonderful, wonderful um that really I think you very clearly, very beautifully just I don't know if I've heard someone move to orthodoxy so eloquently and carefully kind of lay it out the way you just did. That was really, really good. And no, it was I deeply appreciate that. And I can very much see um I can very much see what you're talking about. So that was outstanding. That was outstanding. Thank you so much
Oh,
for
great.
that. It was a privilege.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that with the things that you're doing here, I think we as Christians, I think that we're going to get to a point where the only way that we go forward is by living and being together in a real sense.
Yeah.
In a real sense, not a fake sense, not in a we're on the same side sense, but in a
Yeah.
real sense. And I think if the wheels come off the bus, like so many people are saying, what I love about what Jordan Hall says, is like, hey, at the end of the day, I was standing at the top of the mountain and I realized that does my brother love me? Is that actually going to be the thing? That's the thing that's going to see me through, not the
Yeah.
money, not the power. Those guards can kill you if you live in your underground bunker and
That's
just
right.
take your
That's right.
stuff.
That's right.
But if you love your neighbor and you have seen your kids play together and they eat the same food every Sunday morning, that's what matters. And
Yeah.
so I think, you know, I love TLC and the people that come together because they're I think we're all working to try and find out how we do that. I think maybe one of the weaknesses of it is that we're kind of, because we're all modern Western people, we're trying to logic it out in a way, you know. Sorry, my camera keeps zooming out, and that's I think a danger. But I do think that being able to have a conversation where we kind of realize what matters most, and I really think what matters most is how we be and how we be together. Really together, our identity is in the communal, in the most intimate way. And I think that as a pastor, that's what actually matters at
Yeah.
the end of the day. And it's just
Yeah.
about levels. Like, what
Yeah.
are the levels that we're doing this at?
Yeah.
Societally, in the home,
Yeah.
as a parish, um, on YouTube,
Yeah.
whatever that means,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about it with you.
Oh, well, no, the pleasure was all mine. You mentioned earlier there was something maybe you wanted to go. I don't know if you still want to go there, if you have time, but
Yeah, please, I'd love to.
if there was something else that you wanted to, because you know what I do. I want to get your story, and you told your story beautiful. I didn't know if there's anything else you wanted to ask me or do before we wrap it up.
Yeah. Well, I guess Paul, as a pastor, as someone that has to deal with, I guess, the darkest part of the human soul all the time. What do you think? What do you think realistically is the answer for the church to meet the moment that we're going into? You've talked to the Jordan Halls, you've talked to the Vervekis, you talked to Pajot, you know, philosophical Silk Road, all of that stuff. Wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
But what's actually from where you're sitting right now and how you're feeling right now, what is the actual answer to meet this moment effectively
I
as
don't know.
Christians,
Yeah,
maybe?
I don't know that the answer is anything new. A new commandment I give you that you love one another as I have loved you. I mean that I mean what Jordan Hall said the other day, I don't remember exactly where it was. He said it a number of times, but he said, for the church to do the basic thing of the church. Well, what is the basic thing of the church? A new commandment that I give you that you love one another as I have loved you. And so to figure out what that looks like in the detail of real life. That's really hard. And you learn that,
But in your
marriage.
life,
What's
in
that?
your life, in your life as a pastor, I know you keep saying of a dying church or whatever. I don't know how
Yeah.
true that is, but what is that, like 20 years from now, what are you going to be, you know?
Let's see. My father died at 77. Will I be alive 20 years from now? I don't know. So that'll make me 81.
Absolutely.
So I don't know. And so I actually take I know it deeply frustrates a lot of people that I don't have more of a program to offer people because people are always wanting to sign on to some
Yeah.
program or something. And if
You
they
don't want to be
really
a
want
cult
to
leader?
if they really want a thing, I'll tell them, if you really want to do a thing, why don't you start a little estuary group? And people will look at that and say, well, what does that do? We just sit around and talk. And it's like, yeah, that's about it. But if you can, because so often it's really hard to love somebody if you don't listen to them, if you don't listen carefully or well to them, because people don't feel loved if they just have this program that they're looking to foist on you. They don't feel loved at all because they're actually a person and they're a person. They have needs and they have fears and they have anxieties and they have wants and they have all of those things that persons have. And so usually about the first step is to maybe ask a really broad question and then listen and try to listen well, which
Mm.
is actually remarkably difficult.
Yeah.
And then, at least try to do no harm. Um, because part of what happens with so many programs and projects that people are always foisting upon us is that they're often meant well, but they also do some harm along the way. And
Yeah.
so, and that doesn't mean you can't do anything, and it doesn't mean sometimes you don't have to say a hard word or a painful word or something like that. There are definitely times and places for that, but generally speaking, in order for that to be effective, you need to have developed a well of trust and goodwill. And lately, the last couple of days, I've been thinking about this question of authority and what exactly is
Yeah.
authority when we talk about it and we think about it. And that's actually going to be in my sermon for this week. But and so one of the things that I can critique my own tradition. One of the things that the Reformed sort of continually fall victim to is they tend to be fairly activistic, which is surprises people because people think Reformed theology is sort of a deterministic theology. And it can certainly be viewed that way, but I've been living amongst Reformed people all my life, and I actually find them to be activists more than anything else. And they usually
Mm.
have a program, and they mean well for their program, and they would like to implement their program. But as you know, whether it's Ramtha or whatever, beware of people's programs for you because even if they mean well and if they're genuinely wonderful, honest, lovely, loving people, programs are really tricky things. And we
Yeah.
don't quite know what those programs are going to give to us. And so, part of what I think we come to the end of after a lot of a very activistic culture is mm, maybe maybe let's listen a little carefully to each other and try and understand where they're coming from. And along the way, we might have admonitions and suggestions and things for each other, but probably that will be best implemented to the degree that we actually understand what's happening, and it will be accepted to the degree that there is actually something between us that's real and true. And, in your story, part of what's so devastating about your story was that, what your father did was violate a trust.
Yeah.
And who knows what he grew up in, and who
It wasn't
knows
good.
what grew what he eventually manifested, but he violated a trust. And it's your story is rather remarkable because when so tragically after your mother passed, there was a couple who were credible enough and Christian enough that they could actually reinstill trust in your brother to a
Yes.
sufficient degree that you two could go out into the world and function. Because as a pastor, I spend a lot of time with people who they cannot trust and they do not have the faculty of trusting. And what's difficult for people like that, and it isn't the case that the world is trustworthy. No, the world is not trustworthy. That's true. But you really can't live in this world without entrusting yourself to some people and some things. And you must always navigate that. And so actually what's interesting when I work with people who, like in your story, have had a deep betrayal and a deep trust violated very early on, it isn't the case that they don't trust anyone ever. They certainly keep that list very short. But what's remarkable about them is how regularly they trust the wrong people. Which and so I'm often working with people like this, and then usually what happens is I have a rather intense period of contact with them when they've gotten themselves into a problem. They're in a hole and they trust me. And so they call me because they reliably know that when they're in a hole, I'll come and I'll try and help. And so I will come and I will try and help and we'll sort of get out of that hole. And then I won't hear from them for a while. And in the back of my mind, I'm
Right.
thinking, they're gonna fall into another hole. And they won't call me before they fall into another hole and say,
Yeah.
this is happening and I'm thinking about doing this. Should I do it? And the reason they don't call me is because somewhere in the back of their mind they know Pastor Paul's probably going to say don't do it, but I really want to do it. So I'm going to do it. And then they're in another hole. And then they call me, Pastor Paul, you got to help me. I'm in a hole.
This is a deep hole.
This is the worst. And every hole they're in is like, this is the worst one ever. And it's like, I don't know, that last one, that was pretty bad. This
That was pretty bad.
and so, I think the project that Christ gives us, if you can call it a project, I think that's actually a distortion of it. But I think you said nicely,
Mm.
the way of life that Christ gives us is that way of life. a new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you. And just as you said, the world reliably falls apart. Wheels reliably come off the bus. And when that happens, Christians reliably get injured and killed all along the way. And part of the reason you know that is because the Christian's leader and master, that's exactly his story. And in fact, when he would just, I mean, I've been going through the Gospel of Luke. In fact, when he just told his disciples, it's kind of like talking to a child, and you sit down, you say, you take to the child, now, okay, give me your eyes, look me straight in the eye. I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to happen. So we're going to go down to Jerusalem. I'm going to be turned over into the hands of Gentiles. I'm going to be crucified, and then I'm going to rise again. And it's like he tells them that 3 times, and they learn nothing. And that's so human. So, so
Yeah.
this week I preach on the road to Emmaus, where
Uh-huh.
Jesus is talking to these people. And they're just like, I can't believe what happened. And now the women have said the tomb is empty and we don't know. And Jesus kind of is like, fellas, did you hear anything I said? He's
Yeah.
a little upset with him. He's frustrated with him. Everything, everything, the law and the prophets, what I told you, this is the whole plan all along. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And they're still just sort of confused, and then suddenly they recognize him when he breaks the bread, and then he leaves. Why does he leave then? Because mission accomplished, and because this now is the pattern, and this will be the church, and it'll be a mess. It'll be a mess. And I don't care you know what brand of church or anything like that. Trust me, messes will happen, because we're a mess making species.
We really don't like to participate in true reality.
No, because it's a little impinging, and we really do
Yes.
want to be God. And when God says, I'm planning on making you like me, we hear that and we're like, well, it's these parts of you that I want. I want the power and control, and I'd really love to use instead of love. And Jesus is like, that's exactly the part that
Yeah.
needs to die. You need to
Yeah.
stop trying to use people, and you need to learn to love them. And here's another little fact about all you human beings. It can be easy to love, like when you're a baby and you're cuddly and you're warm, but you can also be incredibly annoying and difficult to love. And the older you get, the harder
Just ask
you.
my wife.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So that's to me, um, what I would love people to know. But just as you said, just because you can sort of conceive a whole system in your mind and think about it and say, "Oh yeah." In fact, we've Christianity has been remarkably successful in our culture, to the point that in the counterculture, just as Tom Holland noted, the Beatles sang out, "All you need is love." Yeah, that's true. That's true. But love is something that has
What
to be
level?
lived. Yes, yes. What does it, is it like John and Yoko? Is that love? Well, there's some love there, I'm sure, but remember, there's no, there, that's no, there, it's all love. Love is all you need. Well, love is the beginning of all that we need. And love brings us all that we need. But when you understand love to be like a sentiment or a feeling or a giddiness that you have in this first, the first beginnings of infatuation or something like that, you're being awfully shallow, and because of course Christianity says that love looks like a man submitting to a political execution by Imperial Rome. So that wasn't quite
Mm.
what John Lennon was thinking of. But
Yeah.
but love also is, as your story, love is a mother that doesn't just say, well, the courts of Washington are stupid, so I'm going to abandon my son to a tyrannical man who I fell in love with because I saw something in him, but quite unfortunately has become a monster. I cannot surrender my son to that. And so I will, at the cost of my life, pour everything out to rescue my son. That is love.
Yeah.
But even when
Yeah.
we do that, even a mother can't do it perfectly because we're terrible lovers. And so God is, so the book of Hosea, where, you know, God says to poor Hosea, hey, I want you to marry that woman. And Hosea's like, wasn't that the kind of woman that mama said don't marry? And God says, yeah, marry
Yeah.
that one
That one.
because that's the kind of wife I have. So
Yeah.
that's the
It's amazing, it's and I don't want to step out or be in any way heretical, but like, the death to self, that's the aspect I think in the Trinity that is being reflected. The person's dying, it's the lowering,
yeah,
the going down
yeah,
for the greater.
yeah,
And that is just reflected. And, it's Florensky, who was a monk that was killed by the Soviets. He was a polymath, one of the smartest
yeah,
people to live probably in the
yeah,
20th century, and was
yeah,
ended up martyred. But he wrote very extensively on how the human being is the symbol of the symbol,
yeah, yeah,
the symbol of the symbol.
yeah, yeah. It's a great way to
You
say it.
know,
Yeah, yeah,
and to symbolize everything is what creation is doing.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
The ultimate symbol, which
yes,
is Father, Son, Holy Spirit,
yeah,
that forever
yeah,
giving up,
yeah,
giving up of
yeah,
the person
yeah,
to the greater. And I
yeah,
think that if we do that as people, as Christians,
yeah,
we create a world
yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
cannot end regardless of what's happening around.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm so fortunate to be able to speak with you and
Oh,
and
the
do
pleasure's all
this.
mine, Raymond. The pleasure's all mine. I met you there and immediately I thought, "Oh, I love this guy. I love this guy." And so, I told you there I said, "Oh, I want to have a longer conversation because at ARC, it's busy and there's lots of people and stuff
Yeah,
like that and
we'll see how it
um,
goes in the next couple of years. It was,
oh, who knows?"
as we were saying, it was a lot of kayfabe. I know everyone hates that term now, but a lot of kayfabe. But
Yeah.
the real discussions were happening in the
Yeah.
back corner,
Yeah, they
just
were.
like they are happening in the little corner. And I really hope that you continue this mission. I think it is a great mission, and I pray for everyone to not live passively in what they're doing. And we just do that so much. I still
Yeah.
do that. I
Yeah.
haven't have in I by the way, I have in no way figured anything out like
Yeah. Yeah.
the way that I should be
Yeah.
figuring things out.
Yeah.
There are many things that I deal with day to day. And I'm not saying that, and I think especially online, the ortho bros and stuff like that, they have this posture that like,
They're
hey,
so
to get the
reformed.
yeah,
Some of them are
exactly.
so
Yes, exactly.
reformed. They're like,
Yeah,
we have it
actually that
all. It's
was,
like, okay,
if
I've
I
seen
was
this
thinking of
game
the thing
before.
that I really wanted to speak with you about is on top of that is, I think the best criticism of this movement, the Orthodox movement or the move to traditional Christianity, is the fact that a lot of people are treating it as a form of protest, you
Yeah.
know,
Oh, yeah.
and I tried to think, and I hope that I said when I was telling you my story about why I became more like, did I do it as a form of protest? There was a kernel there
Yeah.
of protest against the authority of what I disagreed with. I think that's
Yeah.
true,
Yeah.
but but really, I think that the people that move towards it are really searching for meaning
Yeah.
in a deep way.
Yeah.
And a lot of those people that are very vocal, probably most of them are catechumens or people not even baptized or recently baptized in the church. Um, when they realize, I mean, like, I just think of it now, especially after I was baptized. I had that like zeal at the beginning of it when I was baptized in the church. And Orthodox, I was like, hey, I did it. Wow, that mountain is really high.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Like that
Yeah.
mountain is, and I haven't, am I on the first rung? I don't even know. I can't even see the ladder right now, and I think if we take that posture to the faith, that you're really climbing a mountain and you're going to slip and you're going to fall and salvation is the climbing. I think that that was something that I came to realize in orthodoxy of just like what salvation is. Very different from the way I viewed it as in the Reformed tradition as being elect, a status maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Salvation is a forever thing
Yeah.
of climbing the mountain towards God and being closer to Him continually, and that doesn't end when Jesus comes back. You know, um, and our salvation is worked out with fear and trembling, as Paul said. It's a status that is bestowed upon us, being, I think, the image of God,
Yeah.
and how we participate in that is really what matters
Yeah.
at the end of the day. But I do think that people need to be careful, especially anyone, if any of the 100 people that listen to this, like if you're really thinking about being Orthodox, um, don't do it because you feel like the arguments are better.
Yeah.
Do not do that. Don't do it. You are going to be, I mean, should I say this? Like, when I went there, like they were basically pushing me away.
Yeah.
They weren't warm, or, I mean, they were warm, but they weren't like here's your tote and your cup of glass and like, let's schedule things. And we love you. We love you. We love you. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of problems with Orthodoxy, especially in America. So many problems of culture and no money and having to live in an ancient way and a church calendar that has absolutely no bearing or reflection in the way that we live our life right now. It's just like it's not going to be easy. And those theological arguments that you love having on Twitter are not going to carry you through those things
They are
at
not.
all. At all.
The
So I think
theological
like
arguments on
you
Twitter.
should, yeah, like I think actually that as you continue, like you should really shine a light on that. And I hope that the Orthodox, I would say the mature Orthodox leaders that participate in that space really make light of that, because um, the faith is way bigger than
Yeah.
a bunch of arguments. We're
Yeah.
here to be like God, not tell
Well,
someone they're not.
yeah. No, and I praise God for what's been happening in Orthodoxy in America, and um, I think you've been getting a lot of great people. So I think that's wonderful. I think that's wonderful. It's
Yeah, and who knows how long will last. I mean, I do think that the difference in in kind of like like turn of the century America revivalist Christianity when all of that was happening. I think it's a different kind of thing as we're kind of spinning out of this modern experiment and think the wheels come off the bus, and they will come off the bus. They will. We're really going to be forced to accept some realities of what we're doing,
yeah.
and it's not going to be arguing
No.
about
No. Nope.
about
Nope.
election.
Nope. No, it will not. Well, we
But
should.
you really will need a community to surround yourself with, for
Oh,
sure, for
absolutely.
sure.
Yep. Yep. And that's always been the case, and it'll continue to be the case. Well, Raymond, I've so enjoyed this. I've so appreciated this. I've
Same. It's crazy to talk to you. I like love listening to you guys and the guests that you have on, and hopefully we'll get to meet in person again sometime soon or talk again. I'd love it. But
I'm sure we
I
will.
wish you
I'm
all
sure
the
we will.
best.
All right.
All
Take
righty.
care of yourself.
Bye. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.